What's up, kids? This is a piece called The Counter-Revolutionary Revolution by Max Shachtman. It's from The Fate of the Russian Revolution, Lost Texts of Critical Marxism, edited by Matgamna. What was I going to say? This is from the section of the book titled Russian Imperialist Expansion. Thanks for listening. Here we go. One second, actually. Come on, you son of a gun. Alright. This is from New International, July 1943. We have restored deletions and changes, all of them small and of a copy editing function made by Shachtman when he republished this article in his book, The Bureaucratic Revolution. This is the first part of the article. The second part is in chapter 10 of this book. Okay, so here we go. General Prince Alexander Vasilyevich Suvorov was a military figure of great renown who served throughout Europe under the Empress Catherine and after her under Emperor Paul in the latter half of the 18th century. Wikipedia says Alexander Suvorov lived from 1729 to 1800 and was a Russian general and military theorist in the service of the Russian Empire. Born in Moscow, he studied military history as a young boy and joined the Imperial Russian Army at the age of 17. Promoted to colonel in 1762 for his success during the 7 Years' War, his victories over the War of the Bar Confederation included the capture of Krakow and victories at Orzechova, Lankorona, and Stolivica, I don't know, I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong. Alexander Suvorov's reputation rose further when in the Russo-Turkish War of 1768 to 1774, he captured Turtukkaya twice and won a decisive victory at Kozludza. After a period of little progress, he was promoted to general and led Russian forces in the Russo-Turkish War of 1787 to 1792, participating in the siege of Ochakov, as well as victories at Kinburn and Foscani. Suvorov won a decisive victory at the Battle of Rymnik, and afterwards defeated the Ottomans in the storming of Izmail, Izmail. His victories at Foscani and Rymnik established him as the most brilliant general in Russia, if not all of Europe. In 1794, he put down the Polish uprising, defeating them at the Battle of Praga and elsewhere. After Catherine the Great died in 1796, her successor, Paul I, often quarreled with Suvorov. After a period of ill favor, Suvorov was recalled to a field marshal position at the outbreak of the French Revolutionary Wars. Suvorov was given command of the Austro-Russian army, and after a series of victories such as the Battle of Trebia, he captured Milan and Turin and nearly erased all of Napoleon's Italian conquest of 1796 to 97. After an Austro-Russian army was defeated in Switzerland, Alexander Suvorov, ordered to reinforce them, was cut off by Andrei Massena and later surrounded in the Swiss Alps. His successful extraction of the exhausted, ill-supplied, and heavily outnumbered Russian army was rewarded by a promotion to generalissimo. Massena himself would later confess that he would exchange all of his victories for Suvorov's passage of the Alps. Suvorov died in 1800 of illness in St. Petersburg. Suvorov was instrumental in expanding the Russian Empire as his successes ensured Russia's conquering of Kuban, Crimea, and New Russia. One of the foremost generals in all of military history, and considered the greatest military commander in Russian history, Alexander Suvorov has been compared to Napoleon in military generalship. Undefeated, Alexander Suvorov has been described as the best general Republican France ever fought, and noted as, quote, one of those rare generals who were consistently successful despite suffering from considerable disadvantages, end quote. Alexander Suvorov was also admired by his soldiers throughout his whole military life and respected for his honest service and truthfulness. I need a history refresher, so forgive me. Catherine the Great lived from 1729 to 1796, most commonly known as Catherine the Great, or Catherine II, most commonly known as Catherine the Great, was the reigning empress of Russia from 1762 to 1796. Catherine the Great came to power after overthrowing her husband Peter III. Under her long reign, inspired by the ideas of the Enlightenment, Russia experienced a renaissance of culture and sciences, which led to the founding of many new cities, universities, and theaters, along with a large-scale immigration from the rest of Europe, and with the recognition of Russia as one of the great powers of Europe. In Catherine the Great's accession to power and her rule of the empire, Catherine often relied on her noble favorites, most notably Count Grigory Orlov and Grigory Potemkin. Assisted by highly successful generals such as Alexander Suvorov and Peter Rumyantsev, and admirals such as Samuel Greig and Fyodor Ushakov. She governed at a time when the Russian Empire was expanding rapidly by conquest and diplomacy. In the south, the Crimean Khanate was annexed following victories over the Bar Confederation and the Ottoman Empire in the Russo-Turkish War. In anticipation of future conflicts with the Ottoman Empire, Russia colonized the territories of New Russia along the coast of the Black and Azov Seas. In the west, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, ruled by Catherine's former lover, King Stanislav August Poniatowski, was eventually partitioned, with the Russian Empire gaining the largest share. In the east, Russian settlers began to colonize Alaska, establishing the colony of Russian America. Many cities and towns were founded on Catherine's orders in the newly conquered lands, most notably Yekaterinoslav, Kherson, Nikolaev, and Sevastopol. An admirer of Peter the Great, Catherine continued to modernize Russia along Western European lines. However, military conscription and the economy continued to depend on serfdom, and the increasing demands of the state and of private landowners intensified the exploitation of serf labor. This was one of the chief reasons behind rebellions, including Pugachev's rebellion of Cossacks, nomads, peoples of the Volga, and peasants. The Manifesto on Freedom of the Nobility, issued during the short reign of Peter III and confirmed by Catherine, freed Russian nobles from compulsory military or state service. The construction of many mansions of the nobility in the classical style endorsed by the Empress changed the face of the country. She is often included in the ranks of the enlightened despots. As a patron of the arts, she presided over the age of the Russian Enlightenment, including the establishment of the Smolny Institute of Noble Maidens, the first state-financed higher education institution for women in Europe. And the Smolny Institute was a it's a very important building in the Russian Revolution. Sorry, gotta look up one more person. Paul the First of Russia. Paul the First, who lived from 1754 to 1801, was Emperor of Russia from 1796 until his 1801 assassination. Paul remained overshadowed by his mother Catherine the Great for most of his life. He adopted the laws of succession to the Russian throne, rules that lasted until the end of the Romanov dynasty in the Russian Empire. Paul I also intervened in the French Revolutionary Wars, and toward the end of his reign added Kartli and Kakheti in eastern Georgia into the empire, which is confirmed by his son and successor Alexander I. He was de facto Grand Master of Knights Hospitaller from 1799 to 1801 and ordered the construction of a number of priorities of the Order of Malta. Paul's pro-German sentiments and unpredictable behavior made him unpopular among the Russian nobility, and he was secretly assassinated by his own officers. Okay, so I think we're ready to go back to the text. General Prince Alexander Vasilyevich Suvorov was a military figure of great renown who served throughout Europe under the Empress Catherine and after her under the Emperor Paul in the latter half of the 18th century. Suvorov carried the banner of Tsarist reaction to the Danube and threatened the power of the Turks. Suvorov fought the Napoleonic armies as far west and south as Italy and learned Milanese members of that day, Suvorov's troops marched into their city, marked the death of the Cisalpine Republic. Wikipedia says the Cisalpine Republic was a sister republic of France and northern Italy that existed from 1797 to 1799, with a second version until 1802. Back to the text. At the head of a greatly superior army of Russians and Cossacks, he defeated the Poles under Poniatowski and Tadeusz Kościuszko in 1792 and opened the way for the second partition of Poland next year between Catherine and Frederick William of Prussia. In 1794, I can't be looking up all this stuff. I'm not going to get through this piece in any reasonable fashion. In 1794, when Poland rose in insurrection under the banner of Kościuszko, who had entered Krakow, proclaimed national independence, and then forced the besieged troops of the Prussian monarch to withdraw, Catherine sent Suvorov into the field. He emerged triumphant with the capture of Warsaw, which inaugurated the third partition of Poland the following year and its effectual extinction as a nation. Tsarist Russia was the principal pillar of European reaction, the staunchest support of all the black forces that sought to stem the tide of revolutionary Jacobinism set in motion all over the continent by the Great French Revolution. Prince Suvorov was one of the ablest and most odious representatives of this reaction. Prince Suvorov even came to be its symbol. The French counter-revolution in 1799 marched through Brittany and Normandy with the royalists shouting, quote, "Long live Suvorov, down with the Republic," end quote. It was a name with a record and a meaning that it retains to the present day. These recollections are evoked by the reports of the Order of Suvorov, that the Order of Suvorov has now been established in Stalinist Russia. Wikipedia says, the Order of Suvorov is a military decoration of the Russian Federation named in honor of Russian Generalissimo Prince Alexander Suvorov. It was established in 1942, so in the Stalinist period. Back to the text. These recollections are evoked by the reports of the Order of Suvorov has now been established in Stalinist Russia, sometimes called out of pure nostalgia. There is no other reason, the, quote, workers' state, end quote. The Order of Suvorov First Class, quote, may be awarded only to a commander of an army on the front, his chief of staff or departmental heads who have annihilated numerically superior enemy forces or accomplished breakthroughs on major fronts. The second class of the order is given to corps or divisional commanders, and the third class to lower officers, end quote. There is now also an order of Kutuzov, contemporary of Suvorov, and no less devoted a servant of Tsarist despotism. Wikipedia says, the Order of Kutuzov is a military decoration of the Russian Federation named after the Russian Field Marshal Mikhail Illarionovich Kutuzov, who lived from 1745 to 1813. The order was established during World War II to reward senior Red Army officers. The Order of Kutuzov has 3 classes and was retained by the Russian Federation after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Wikipedia says, Mikhail Kutuzov lived from 1745 to 1813 and was a field marshal of the Russian Empire. He served as a military officer and a diplomat under the reign of the three Romanov monarchs, Empress Catherine II, or Catherine the Great, and Emperors Paul I and Alexander I. Kutuzov was shot in the head twice while fighting the Turks, 1774 and 1788, and survived the serious injuries seemingly against all odds. He defeated Napoleon as a commander-in-chief using attrition warfare in the Patriotic War of 1812. Alexander I, the incumbent Tsar during Napoleon's invasion, would write that he would be remembered amongst Europe's most famous commanders, and that Russia would never forget his worthiness. Back to the text. There is now also an order of Kutuzov, contemporary of Suvorov, and no less devoted a servant of Tsar's despotism. Both of them and others of their kind adorn the breasts of any number of Stalin's marshals and generals. It is a sign of the times in Russia, and not the first one, and far from the most important one. The old Red Army, which triumphed over the forces of all the imperialist powers sent against it, is gone, and gone, of course, is the socialist democratism, the internationalism, and the revolutionary spirit with which it was imbued from the start. Only people who do not think twice about how they are insulting the memory of the great founder of that army can refer to the Bonapartist levies that replaced it as, quote, Trotsky's Red Army, end quote. That was a common thing for Trotskyists to do, is refer to the Red Army as belonging to Trotsky. And thus it's like mission progressive as it expanded westward. All the old grades and ranks which the Bolshevik Revolution abolished have been restored and new ones added. The comradely relationship between commandant and rank and file has been replaced by the hierarchical relationship between an officer corps and a disenfranchised serf in uniform that prevails in all imperialist armies. Special guards brigades and divisions have been created in direct imitation, not of the Red Guards of the Revolution, but of the Praetorian Guards regiment set up by Tsar Peter the Great. Yeah, I'm not quite seeing anything for this specific thing. Back to the text. Officers are now prohibited from mingling with the ranks or maintaining an atmosphere of equality with them. Bristling with vulgar decorations, officers from the ranks of platoon commander upward are now provided with flunkies. Each one has a, quote, orderly, who, quote, takes his meals to his officer, makes tea for him, and polishes his boots, end quote. A system of exclusive officers' clubs has been set up, thus formally acknowledging that what was yesterday a thinly disguised reality. Trotsky's Red Army knew no officers, the very name was done away with, and no permanent ranks, that is, no officer corps. The canonization of Suvorov in the Stalinist army is not altogether inappropriate. Suvorov and his army were the banner-bearers of the counter-revolution of their time. If Stalin harks back to the reaction of yesterday, it is because he represents the reaction of today. It is possible that under the name of Suvorov, the Stalinist army will win its battles, the proletariat will not. It is a class that differs from all others in history, above all in the fact that it can conquer and rule only in its own name, and thereby put an end to all rule. In this statement there is not an ounce of sentimentality or abstract idealism. It is a profound and profoundly important social truth. It is not possible to see much more clearly and fully what we saw incompletely and unclearly at the beginning of the war when we first rejected the slogan of, quote, unconditional defense of the Soviet Union. The analysis of the problem of Stalinist Russia made by Trotsky in his last years, an analysis in irreconcilable conflict with one he had made originally, collapsed under the test of events. The Canaanites, who are less interested in critical Marxian analysis and reanalysis than in iconology, deem it sufficient to say their beads over and over again. But Marxism is not and never was a fully completed dogma, but a developing science. Trotsky assigned to Stalinism, to the Stalinist bureaucracy, the role of undermining the economic foundations of the workers' state. By gradually denationalizing the means of production and exchange, loosening the monopoly of foreign trade, Stalinism would pave the way for the restoration of private property and capitalism. Indeed, it would not even survive this restoration. Indeed, it would not even survive this restoration. For that social act would be carried out by the forces of the right wing, toward which the Stalinist center leaned and repeatedly capitulated, and by which it would be crushed. Nothing of the sort occurred. It was the right wing that was crushed by the Stalinist bureaucracy, and not the other way around. State property was not denationalized, but, contrariwise, was more securely concentrated in the hands of the state and vastly expanded. A year before World War II broke out, Trotsky found it possible to assert that the right wing, which the old analysis had described as the wing of the capitalist restoration, represented a left danger to the bureaucracy. The assertion was altogether abrupt, never motivated, not prepared by anything Trotsky had written previously, and to this day remains unexplained by the beadsayers. It is nevertheless an assertion of first-rate significance. As late as 1938, that is, in the same year, Trotsky not only saw an important fascist wing in the Stalinist bureaucracy, i.e. a capitalist wing, but declared that the political pendulum had swung more strongly, quote, to the side of the right, the bourgeois wing of the bureaucracy and its allies throughout the land. From them, i.e. from the right, we can expect ever more determined attempts in the next period to revise the socialist character of the USSR and bring it closer in pattern to, quote, Western civilization, end quote, in its fascist form, end quote. If by the, quote, socialist character of the USSR, end quote, Trotsky was referring primarily to state-owned property, and Trotsky was, the last 5 years have not revealed a single sign of attempts by the bureaucracy or any important section to, quote, revise, end quote, it. Much less, quote, ever more determined attempts, end quote, in the sense of restoring private property. Again, it is the contrary that has happened. One can scrutinize most closely the serious political press, and even the often interesting summaries of the Russian press in the periodicals of the beadsayers, but not a solitary concrete reference will be found to even the beginnings of a trend in the bureaucracy towards the destatification of property, toward the restoration of private property, a prediction which continues to be so completely refuted by events, should be discarded, and if the analysis on which it was based is not discarded outright, it at least demands critical re-examination. That is what we have sought to do in these pages on several occasions, without encountering any comment from the Canaanites. They continue to say their beads. Upon the invasion of Poland, the Baltic countries and Finland, and the division of imperialist booty between Hitler and Stalin, we watched closely for the possibility, even the likelihood, that Stalin would maintain private property in the occupied territories. The attitude was based not only on the experience of the Spanish Civil War, in which the Stalinists were the most ardent defenders of private property, but on the old analysis, according to which the social role of the bureaucracy was to abolish, or to prepare the abolition of, nationalized property. We were profoundly wrong. After a slight delay, the bureaucracy established the same property relations in the occupied countries, as in Russia itself. On this point, Trotsky was unmistakably right, but his statement that the bureaucracy would most probably nationalize property in the occupied territories only deepened the contradictions in his fundamental theory of Stalinist Russia as a worker state. In the course of the dispute which led to the split in the Fourth International, Trotsky developed his point of view on the, quote, degenerated worker state, end quote, to the stage of a, quote, counter-revolutionary worker state, end quote. We know, he said, of the existence of, quote, two completely counter-revolutionary workers' internationals. These critics have apparently forgotten this, quote, category. The trade unions of France, Great Britain, the United States, and other countries support completely the counter-revolutionary politics of their bourgeoisie. This does not prevent us from labeling them trade unions, from supporting their progressive steps, and from defending them against the bourgeoisie. Why is it impossible to employ the same method with the counter-revolutionary workers' state, end quote. Trotsky. But the difference, even from the standpoint of Trotsky's fundamental theory, or rather precisely from that standpoint, is irreconcilable. We are warranted in placing the label, quote, counter-revolutionary over the reformist organizations in the capitalist countries, not because they are for socialism by, quote, bureaucratic methods, but just because they are against the socialist revolution. against the socialist revolution and have given ample evidence of their opposition to the socialist revolution with rifle and machine gun in hand. They are counter-revolutionary because, at bottom, they base themselves upon and defend the capitalist social order and the capitalist property relations on which it stands. That the Stalinist bureaucracy, and the state the Stalinist bureaucracy completely dominates, is counter-revolutionary needs no elaborate demonstration. That is, it opposes the proletarian socialist revolution, whose triumph would mean the end of Stalinism and Stalinism's power. But its similarity with the bourgeois labor organizations in the capitalist countries goes no further. The Stalinist state is not only a defender of bourgeois property and not based upon it. The Stalinist state is not only not a defender of bourgeois property, and not based upon bourgeois property, but has destroyed bourgeois property with all the thoroughness at its command inside of Russia, and, as we now see, even outside of Russia, provided it had the power to do so. The Stalinist state, its work in the occupied countries shows this sufficiently. Just what was the nature and significance of this work? The Stalinist state, represented physically by its armed forces, the Russian army and the GPU, occupied a number of capitalist countries and proceeded to expropriate the bourgeois proprietors, nationalize property under the control of the Stalinists, thus abolishing capitalist property and capitalist property relations. The transformation it effected in the occupied countries is not less than a social revolution. It says that the masses of workers and peasants affected this social change is an exaggeration, to say the least. It was carried out, and in the most thorough manner, by the Stalinist bureaucracy. Trotsky does not characterize the transformation any differently. Trotsky speaks of the Stalinist expropriations of the bourgeoisie as, quote, social revolutionary measures carried out via bureaucratic military means, end quote, and elsewhere remarks, quote, this measure revolutionary in character, quote, the expropriation of the expropriators, end quote, is in this case achieved in a military bureaucratic fashion, end quote. Trotsky. What is the class character of this social revolution? By Trotsky's criterion, it must be characterized as a proletarian socialist revolution. Whether carried out, quote, bureaucratically or, quote, militarily or not. We are able without difficulty to grasp the concept. It is more than that. It is a reality too often repeated in our time. In a counter-revolutionary labor organization, for example, the Second International, which fights to maintain capitalist society and fights against the inauguration of a socialist society. The concept of a counter-revolutionary worker state, which accomplishes a socialist revolution, which establishes thereby a worker state without the working class and against the working class. Stalin converts the workers, wrote Trotsky, quote, into his own semi-slaves, end quote, which makes the socialist revolution, establishes a worker state and, quote, degenerates it all at the same time. There is a concept, as Trotsky wrote, quote, did not disturb our dialectic, end quote, but which certainly destroys a number of fundamental teachings of Marxism, dialectical materialism included. It would now be necessary to teach that there are not only counter-revolutionary opponents of the socialist revolution, but also counter-revolutionary proponents of the socialist, bureaucratic to be sure, but from a class point of view, socialist revolution. It will be necessary to modify the theory that the overthrow of capitalism and the laying of the foundations of socialism can be the work only of the proletariat, by adding that the same task can be accomplished, quote, via bureaucratic military means, end quote, without the proletariat and against the proletariat. The Marxian dialectic has often been abused in the revolutionary movement, as is known, but has never been invoked in justification of a more fantastic theory than the one to which Trotsky was driven in presenting us with the counter-revolutionary socialist revolutionists. Stalinist bureaucracy did indeed carry through a socialist revolution. The Stalinist bureaucracy did indeed carry through a social revolution in the occupied territories. A social revolution in the occupied territories. A social revolution means a change in class rule. What class was put in power in the Baltic countries? The proletariat? If this is so, someone should bring it the good tidings to console it for the bitter memories of totalitarian enslavement enjoyed while it, quote, ruled under Stalin. The new class was really brought to power by the Russian army, the GPU, and its Bonapartist plebiscite was the Russian bureaucracy and the social regime it established, against capitalism but not less oppressive and exploitive of the masses than the latter, is best characterized as bureaucratic collectivism. Such a regime cannot exist without nationalized, or more accurately, state property, far from undermining it or weakening it, much less replacing it with private property. The new bureaucracy bases itself upon it, draws its sustenance and power from it, and employs it as the economic basis indispensable to the savage exploitation of the masses over whom it rules. The end. Thanks for listening.